The sounds of ambulance began to echo in the Kremlin. Putin's illness has hit hard this time. However, the Ukrainian army now has the upper hand. The Russian people have begun to claim with great anxiety that Putin is no longer able to govern them. Tensions on the streets of Moscow have reached a fever pitch, with Putin's policies have resonated around the world. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been the sole power in Russia for nearly 30 years. Although many bad decisions have been made during this period, Putin, who supposedly enjoys popular support, continues his oppressive rule in many areas. But recent developments have shown that Putin's illness has reappeared. This has been a matter of great fear, both in the Russian army and among Putin's supporters, because Putin's illness will bring with it a very big problem. As it is known, Putin spent his youth in the KGB, where he received very heavy training. During this period, it is known that Putin had a severe illness, such as pneumonia, and came back from the brink of death. Although Putin survived as incident, this disease never left him in the future because on the stage on as long he was left with a very big problem with the advancement of his age. This disease recurred again, and according to the information learned by our sources in the Kremlin, the ambulances coming to this region took one person and left. While this information had a great echo all over the world, it once again showed the whole world how troubled Putin's health was. Putin's behavior, especially in recent live broadcasts, has been noticed by war analysts and many figures. It was determined that Putin, who is now much more irritable than before, sometimes cannot control his hands and legs. So the broadcasts were interrupted early. The situation strengthened the possibility that Putin may have Parkinson's disease, which is especially common in former boxers and combat sports athletes. The real problem was that the pro-Putin agencies tried to hide it. But no matter how hard they try, Putin is now at a huge disadvantage against Ukraine. His erratic and angry moves only encourage more people to support Ukraine. In the aftermath of this situation, the Ukrainian army has now reached a point where it is on the verge of victory, and the Russian media has begun to focus on something so different. Putin's treacherous plan has been revealed. Putin revealed the fact that the war in Ukraine was at a point where it could be lost in the propaganda films he showed to his citizens. With this, it became clear once again how much superiority the Ukrainian army has over the Russians. Although Putin is constantly making moves to destroy this portrait of a sick man, the Russian people are now very uncomfortable with this situation, and he decided to organize a huge protest against it. Attendance at Putin's rallies in Russia has dropped considerably in recent days. But the other factor that attracts attention is Putin's mysterious stunt doubles. According to sources in the Kremlin, it has been revealed that there are about 8 names that Putin uses as body doubles. These people take part in Putin's rallies and are responsible for keeping the secrets of Putin, who has been unable to stand up in recent days. But the real problem was recorded as the problems in the administration, as the problem in Putin's long screw. These facts resonated all over the world. Putin is now in a position where he cannot even stand up at his rallies. It turned out that Putin was sent to a deteriorating from the Kremlin for treatment. Putin, who wanted to run the administration from outside the Kremlin, made a mess of everything in this regard, and Putin's world started to be done by the bureaucrats around him. This is thought to have played a major role in Russia's political instability and many problems, such as the defeat by Ukraine. Because Putin was not seen as a leader who would make such hot moves against Ukraine, instead of Putin, who acted very cold-blooded and assuring and avoided moves that would put Russia in trouble. We see a Putin who has made a lot of mistakes and succumbed to his arrogance in recent days. As a result, the victory of the Ukrainian army against the Russians is expected to deepen, but a very big problem has been revealed in Russia. Putin's bureaucrats don't know where to run. A large number of protesters in Russia have started collecting signatures, arguing that the war against Ukraine is irrational and that a peace decision should be made in this area. This signatures exceeded 2 million in about a week, but Putin started to ignore these signatures. This only served to undermine trust in Putin. If this continues, it is expected that the people will ask Putin from power in a very short time. The anti-war protesters have turned Moscow into a firestorm. It is only a matter of time before things get even more complicated. Putin has ruled Russia single-handedly for near 30 years. Everyone around him has been complicit in Putin's crimes and war crimes. In the event of regime change, Putin is expected to be put on trial, and many international courts have ordered his arrest. These decisions also meant that a large number of bureaucrats in Putin's circle would also be put on trial. That's why each of the teams with the most influence in Russia's governance has started to take steps to counter this. Because if Putin falls, many of their networks will be depleted and they will have to face the danger of being prosecuted. And since there is nothing Putin can do about it, the solution is to prevent Putin from falling. But the real mistake was Putin's disgraceful behavior over Ukraine. And these humiliations have become the basis for Russia to face even bigger problems. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the Russian army has lost approximately 200,000 soldiers. Many tanks and airplanes have also been lost thanks to Ukraine's successful and to-the-point operations. The Russian army has been unable to breathe on Ukrainian soil. Putin, on the other hand, has not suffered a defeat in the 30 years of its rule, so he cannot take these defeats against Ukraine. If this continues, the Russian army will start to face even greater losses. And because of the moves it has made at certain points, it is only a matter of time before Ukraine has some very serious successes, especially in foreign policy. Because Putin has started to blame the Western support for Ukraine for this defeat. At the same time, he started making very harsh rhetoric and threats to each of those countries. Things became more complicated because of these moves, and the defeats against the Ukrainian army took another turn because countries all over the world started to support Ukraine to take steps against Russia because of the increase in both the quality and quantity of the support. The Ukrainian army has reached a very different point. The Russian army started to change its stance in the war because it was facing a very big problem. As a result, it is quite possible that Russia will be left with huge tensions. The comments made by war analysts on this issue resonated all over the world. According to war analysts, the Ukrainian army is preparing to take very big steps against the Russians in a short time. The main reason for this is that the Ukrainian army has the quality and quantity to advance against the Russians in a short period of time with a very big victory. In a short period of time, the Ukrainian army can use the reinforcements sent for the most critical operations, and this operation could deal Putin in the most unwanted blow. These blows could soon reorganize a lot of things that would increase the Ukrainian army's gains, and it could be officially declared that the Russian army has lost. Russia's losses are expected to increase in certain areas in a very short period of time, and it is possible that in the continuation of these losses, the Ukrainian army will step by step approach the necessary victory. The Ukrainians seem to have doubled down on their efforts to reduce Russian personnel as much as possible. As you remember, the Russians have been sending a lot of forces through Berdyansk to Tokmak and Melitopol. We have already seen a lot of strikes near Tokmak, and now the time has come for those who headed in the direction of Melitopol. Interestingly, it turned out that a significant increase in first concentrations has been noted near the Dnipro River, in particular near Krylovka and Fedorivka. When it comes to Kulakivka, this is one of the very few settlements in this region that serves as an important connection center as well as located far enough from the nearest Ukrainian position. However, even though the regular short-range artillery is not capable of reaching this target, Ukrainian Air Force still has the means necessary to reach this Russian base. Today, the Ukrainian General Staff reported that as a result of a Ukrainian precision strike on a Russian object near this village, the Ukrainians have inflicted around 500 losses on the Russians. Most of the killed soldiers are newly mobilized men. They finished their training in the camps inside Russia and were finally moved to the front. However, Due to the bureaucratic nature of the Russian army, organizational issues are sorted extremely horribly. That is why the Russians were forced to deal with such bottlenecks and had to pack basically a whole tactical battalion group in one building because the plan for dispersing the forces had not been ready. That is why the Ukrainian officials stated that this successful wave of precision strikes is only the beginning. As Russian troops continue to migrate, all the Ukrainians need to do is just trace them and then hit the packed building at the end destination. Judging by the scandals in the Russian media space about the continuous violation of the operational security measures by the soldiers, tracing them and identifying areas of forces, concentrations should not be too difficult. In fact, today, the Ukrainian Air Force conducted 13 strikes. These strikes targeted not only concentrations, but also command posts and ammunition depots. One of the most successful strikes is expected to be in Fedorivka. The information about Russian losses here is still being specified. The Russians also started to target Ukrainian objects today. A huge explosion was reported in Druzhkivka. Here the Russians have struck a closed ice skating ring, which the Ukrainians basically used as a hangar for ammunition and equipment. Soon after the explosion, a video emerged of firemen putting out the fire inside the hangar. Judging by the video, the hangar was not equipped for stationing people, which is not surprising as Ukrainian soldiers are usually stationed in small houses to keep the groups in small numbers. There was also no sign of secondary detonations, so it was definitely not an ammunition depot. Therefore, the hangar was highly likely used for hiding equipment such as drones, cars, or artillery. Another explosion was reported in Kramatorsk. The information about this particular strike is very scarce as of now. However, we know for sure that Kramatorsk is one of the most important military hubs in the region with a lot of industrial zones. So the goal here was highly likely Ukrainian artillery systems that have been causing them a lot of trouble lately. Nonetheless, it seems like the most important artillery systems HIMARS are constantly on the road right now. It looks like the Ukrainians are just going along the front line, raiding Russian bases and ammunition depots, and so far, pretty successfully over the last 3 or 4 days. The Ukrainians have inflicted around 2,000 irretrievable combat losses to the Russians. If Ukrainian officials are correct and this trend continues for a while, the Russians will have to launch another wave of mobilization very soon. Estonian Ministry of Defense commented on the potential of the Russian soldiers from the next wave of mobilization. They said that their quality will be even lower than of the first, and this conclusion is not surprising because the resources are not endless and Russia is unable to provide its troops with all the necessities at this stage. That is why, according to Ukrainian intelligence, the ill-equipped newly mobilized soldiers are used as cannon fodder by the professional forces that are standing right behind them. The Black Sea, one of the most critical corners of the war, has been shaking with a hot agenda for the last month. The loss of the Russian Navy and the decrease in its dominance in the Black Sea show us that they will face much greater threats. The appearance of the NATO Navy in the Black Sea and the landing of US warships in the Black Sea caused a red alert in the Kremlin. Let's follow the latest developments in detail. We all know that a weakness that the Russian Navy will experience in the Black Sea will make Crimea, the most critical region of the war, vulnerable for Russia. Let's start. Russia had a stronger and more advantageous army compared to the Ukrainian forces. However, it lost its power and advantage over time, except for the first period of the war. Russia could not use its large army, the patriotism of the Ukrainians, and the modern weapons of Western countries had a great impact on this situation. Western countries continue to support the Ukrainian forces, and they give the message that new support packages are being prepared for Ukraine. Western countries' pressure on Russia with sanctions and modern weapons continues. Even the United States began to take more concrete steps. The United States deployed a warship in the Black Sea so that the Kremlin would feel more pressure. This event took place for the first time since Russia started the invasion plan of Ukraine. For the first time since the start of Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, a U.S. warship entered the Black Sea. The guided missile destroyer USS Nietzsche has arrived in a Turkish Portuguese. The American destroyer first docked in the Greek port of Piraeus. The ship then visited Turkey while the U.S. warship was in Turkey. US Consul in Istanbul, Julia Eder, and U.S. Ambassador Jeff Flake visited the ship. During this visit, Julia Eder stated that the ship's existence is linked to Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. USS Nietzsche is part of the George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group operating in the U.S. 6th Fleet Operations Area. The Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush CSG-10 is the flagship of the George H.W. Bush CSG. The presence of the U.S. warship in the Black Sea during the Russo-Ukrainian War indicates that the hegemony of the Russian forces in the Black Sea was largely destroyed. The last visit of the United States Navy to the Black Sea took place in 2021. The destroyer USS Arleigh was the last U.S. warship to leave the Black Sea and pass through the Bosphorus in December 2021. Before Nietzsche's visit to the Black Sea, 2 ships of the United States Navy attempted to approach the Black Sea. The destroyer USS Bainbridge visited Axos, which is closer to the Dardanelles, in July 2022. Another destroyer, USS Mitchell, also visited Axos in March 2022. The reason why the USA did not visit the Black Sea for a long time is because they thought that this move would escalate the war. But as we have seen recently, Russia has lost a great deal of dominance in the Black Sea, and the United States does not think that the Russians are likely to escalate the war. Russia has not won any wars against Ukrainian forces. Russian forces are trying to pierce the Ukrainian defense with ground attacks, but the Ukrainian forces do not allow the Russians to succeed. The Kremlin army is constantly losing power. Although there was no continuous conflict, Russia lost the most power in the Black Sea. The wrong war strategy, followed by the Kremlin government, deeply affected the Russian Black Sea Fleet. At least 18 ships and boats of the Russian Black Sea Fleet were sunk or fatally damaged after Russia's full-scale invasion plan began. This means that it lost close to 25% of its pre-war combat power, which consisted of 74 ships and boats. An interesting detail is that in 1990, the Russian Black Sea Fleet consisted of 800 ships, 274 of which were warships. But then it began to decline sharply compared to the Soviet Union era. It is seen that the Russian forces had 5 times fewer ships when the Ukrainian war began. Russia's total ship composition decreased threefold. The Black Sea Fleet, together with patrol boats, had 74 combat units by February 2022. Compared to Russia's past and present, everything is terrible for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. At the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, Russia had 6 diesel-electric submarines, 6 large surface ships, including a missile cruiser, 36 other ships and support vessels in the Black Sea region. In January 2022, Russia reinforced additional forces from the Northern, Baltic, and Pacific fleets to the Black Sea and Mediterranean under the pretext of the exercise. 6 landing ships went through the Black Sea, others remained in the eastern Mediterranean. At the start of the war, the Ukrainian forces had a very, very small navy. After the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014, the Ukrainian Navy lost its ships and had to move its main base to Odessa. Ukrainian forces had no claims in the naval area. Despite this, Russian sailors lost the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the Project 1164 Moskva missile cruiser, to a country that did not have a navy as a service arm. As we just have mentioned, Russia's loss of dominance in the Black Sea is due to the Kremlin's adoption of wrong war strategies. With the annexation of Crimea in 2014, the main base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet became the port in Sevastopol. Russian forces were putting a lot of pressure on Ukraine, thanks to this Portuguese, but the Russian army was not protecting this port well enough. Russia's main base in Sevastopol is not equipped with modern electronic warfare systems and radars for detecting naval and air drones. Ukrainian forces made good use of this vulnerability and struck the heart of the Russian Black Sea Fleet with drones. Many ships in the port were badly damaged. After annexing Crimea, Russia promised to modernize Moscow. For this reason, the Russian missile cruiser Moskva was sent to the docks for 3 years. However, instead of a complete modernization at the shipyard of the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, only the engines were repaired and Moskva continued to operate with the old air defense systems. As you know, the Russian missile cruiser Moskva was shot down by the Ukrainian forces using the Neptune missile. The Kremlin did not accept this and stated that Moskva sank as a result of fire. The experts who repaired the flagship stated that the ship was in a deplorable condition. According to them, the antenna in Moscow later rotted and the lower part of the ship was rusted, thus punctured in some places. At the same time, the Kremlin government still did not admit that the crew had died at the time of the sinking of Moskva. There were between 400 to 680 sailors in Moskva, and probably all of them died, according to Ukrainian intelligence authorities. And intelligence agencies are forcing the families of Russian sailors to withhold information about the sailors who died on the cruiser. Many of the ship's crew are still considered missing. Moskva, one of Russia's most important ships, was buried deep in the Black Sea, never to be used again. And the Russian Black Sea Fleet was badly damaged. While changing the balance of power on the northern shores of the Black Sea became a major focus of attention. While the Black Sea is in great demand, there are several scenarios that can be experienced in the Black Sea. In the scenarios we encounter, the key role is always Turkey's. In the first scenario, Turkey, which maintains its skillful bureaucracy between the parties, can be effective in the peace process. It could hasten the ceasefire between Russian and Ukrainian forces. Russia's war crimes and unlawful attitudes in Ukraine indicate that this process will not provide continuity and will lead to worse results. In the second scenario, in the event of a prolonged war in Ukraine, the U.S. pressure on Turkey to comply with NATO's sanctions regime may increase NATO pressures, negatively affect agreements between Ankara and Moscow, and this issue may cause problems in Syria. The policy that Turkey will implement may lead to the collapse of today's fragile balance. The probability of this scenario occurring is quite high, considering today's conditions. Except for the first period of the war, Russia could not use its large army. The patriotism of the Ukrainians and the modern weapons of the Western countries had a great impact on this situation. Western countries continued to support the Ukrainian forces. As long as this support continues, Ukraine's victory seems very close. Vladimir Putin has realized that he will lose the war at any moment. It is reflected in the intelligence reports that the Russian ports in the Black Sea are on the alert. However, they do not seem to be able to prevent Ukraine's attack on Crimea, which will unlock the war no matter what.